We're all a little bit giddy ahead of Ireland against France this weekend, and I'm delighted to say Keith Wood is with us now. Keith, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you? How are you, Jerry? You well?
Yeah, looking forward to this. Like at a level that by the time the World Cup rolled around, we kind of knew what was going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen this weekend, but we feel pretty good about the state of our team. And yet, this French team could be one of the great all-time teams. So, like that's why we live as sports fans, is to watch this stuff.
Well, we want a bit of doubt, actually. No, we'd like the doubt to fall on our side and things to go well for us. But we do like the expectation that goes into it. For me, since the autumn, we now have an expectation that we're going to play. And that's quite reassuring. And I'm not saying we don't want to win. We do want to win, but I think we'll show up. And that's one of the great parts from the particular manner in which Ireland are playing. You then have France, who I don't compare France to us, strangely. I compare France to England and to the ideological viewpoint of what their coaches have done. They bit early and decided they were going to bring young guys through. So now all the young guys have a huge amount of experience in international rugby, and they haven't won on it. They've won big matches, but they haven't won competitions. But they look like they're in a really good position to have a tilt at the trophy. And England on the other side seem to be chopping and changing consistently with no real sense of direction. I read Eddie Jones saying his opinion is the only one that matters this week. And that's just an interesting view to have. And for whatever reason, it just seems as if you know for certain that Andy Farrell is the boss in Ireland, but it seems to be a little bit more egalitarian. And I think the players are having an opportunity to make a lot of decisions.
And the coaching tickets seem to be fully trusted, actual voices that are listened to, encouraged. There's that egalitarian thing. Like, you don't bring Paul O'Connell in and then tell him what to do. You listen to what he has to say, and you ask for his opinion, and you collaborate, and they have been built up as leaders. Like, we know who they are, we know their role within it. It's not this giant untrammeled ego in charge.
Yeah, look, it's funny. I was trying to think of this during the week and wondering whether there was a drifting away from the coach being the be-all, end-all, all-knowing Mandarin that knows everything and everybody else is wrong. And I have to say, I go back to the reasons for playing, and you want to be able to express yourself and you want to enjoy yourself and have a bit of fun. Every time I pick up anything on this Irish camp, there's an element about freedom and enjoyment. And it's funny, I don't know whether that would have been the right thing to happen, and would that have been successful prior to Joe Schmidt. But I think Joe Schmidt is given a sense of discipline in some of the process that's required. And I think we're seeing that through Paul O'Connell, and I think that's very important. But I don't know that guys are getting castigated for dropping a ball. And whereas Johnny Sexton threw a 50-50 in the Welsh 22 last week, that would have been considered, absolute disgrace a couple of years ago. Now at least he's trying. At least that was an option for him. At least there was people trying to run the line for him. And I think they'd rather it stuck to hand, but I don't know that they're being drawn over the coals for that.
Is that because, Keith, they reckon that if they do this enough and make the wrong decision in those 50-50 scenarios enough, they will eventually make the right decision in those 50-50 scenarios, say in 12, 18 months' time?
I think that's part of it. I think the decision-making is good. I mean, I was looking at Ringrose's try, and the thing I loved about it, I don't know whether it was picked up or not, but Bundy, who I thought was incredible at the weekend, I thought we saw the full range of his skill set. But he looked up before he passed that long, wide pass that got to the tip of Ringrose's fingers. It was a great pass, but it was the look and the effort and everything that went into it. I wouldn't be so, there's risk, high level of risk to that. And Ringrose nearly knocked it on. And on such small margins are tries scored and things like that. But I think you do want to try different things. It's one, having the skills to do it. It's two, practicing them in a white hot of an international rugby match. And I thought we got both the other day. I thought Wales were poor, but I thought we made them look poor. And I thought we made plenty of mistakes, and I wasn't even vaguely upset by that. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but it seems to be in the right place. And, that could all come a cropper this weekend. And I just hope we don't go back into our shell. I hope we continue with that idea of trying things, because it's enjoyable to watch. But also it looks like it's incredibly enjoyable to play. And the players actually look as if they're enjoying it. There
is a world where these risks backfire, and so Wales scored their try. It's a beautiful pass to set the flanker into space to run in under the post. The type of thing that exactly I think under the previous regime would have been like, never try that again. But actually, there is a cost to playing on the edge, and that cost is that sometimes things go awry. The benefit is that more often than not, the creativity that you have will be impossible for the opposition defence to smother the way it turned out. You could just batter us under Schmidt, and the big teams frequently did that to us. When this comes, when we lose a game because of too many risks, when there's 2 intercept tries scored against us in the same game, we lose by 1. Like, what do we do then? How do we prepare ourselves for this potential eventuality? And is that where the challenge comes, and it's like, actually, you got to double down and keep going, throw that pass again?
Look, I think rarely matches come down to 1 or 2 things, and it often happens because people look for inflection points in games. But I think if you have that set as a philosophy, that's how you're going to play, because it puts teams under huge pressure. You know that teams are going to figure that out over a period of time. They're going to see some of the tells that are more common. I just think there's a lot of tells at the moment, but there's a lot of options at the moment, and it's hard to figure out which tells which. But in time, that'll be found out. So this is not static. This has to change. This has to improve all the time. But I think the philosophy of saying we don't want to stifle creativity, so you're allowed. This is like a harsh criticism of Joe Schmidt, but it actually worked. So it worked until it didn't work. And whereas you kept doing it exactly as described until there was a chink, and then when that chink happened, you knew you were going to score. Well, that got figured out, and when it was figured out, we were never getting to that chink that was stopping 3 or 4 or 5 phases beforehand, and we were under a huge amount of pressure, and that was the bit that changed. So I think now, if you could say then that if something was on then, but it was in the midst of a play that was going to happen, that was frowned upon. So now we're seeing creativity. Look, I was critical of this coaching setup because I felt that they weren't making a change from the Joe Schmidt era, and it seemed to be similar to what it was like in the last year of Joe Schmidt's reign when we were under huge pressure all the time. I felt as if we continued with that, and Mike Catt, for me, wasn't making as much of a change to it. But I think maybe we were wrong in some respects, but it took time. So it took time to get away from that idea where you could be creative. So it's enjoyable to watch. I mean, like, I thought it was a really good game. I mean, I would have rather the game was closer, because that's what the Six Nations is about, but that's not Ireland's fault. And I thought it was an impressive start, which we don't start that well, and I thought we kept it up for the vast majority of the game.
Before I ask you about France and what you think you're going to get from them this weekend, what do you make of the noise around England at the moment? Because from the outside, it seems like this is stereotypical preparation for a World Cup from Eddie Jones, where he does not care what happens in the Six Nations. And yet I see calls for him to be sacked. The back page of the Telegraph this morning, what will it take for Jones to be sacked? It's James Corrigan writing the piece. And I'm like, what? They've got a bunch of kids who are getting unbelievable experience in high pressure environment. He's absolutely preparing them for what's coming next. And their raft of injuries is as bad as Wales, pretty much. Like, this isn't the England team that we're seeing at the moment. It's England's nearly B team, and it's invaluable for when it comes to crunch moments this time next year, and more importantly, in 18 months' time.
Yeah, I don't agree with that, Ger. I do like to see young guys getting a chance. but there has to be method to the madness, and the amount of players that have been used, you do need some level of consistency in selection for players to try and go and do it. And also you need to try and play a style that suits the players that you have. So, and I've read some of the comments, and Eddie Jones has just said, look, a lot of the pundits and whatever, they're fantastic retrospectively. But we spoke, Stuart Barnes was on Off the Ball with me last Wednesday, and we spoke before the team was announced that if they pick Marcus Smith, we really hope that they have a big centre playing 12 and Don Brandt playing 8, because they absolutely suit each other. Eddie is convinced that the number on a player's back doesn't really matter. Well, that's a viewpoint. It's not a viewpoint I'd agree with. I do think you can play in different positions, but players that are playing at the top of their game in a particular jersey, that's the reason you pick them. You don't pick them to put them into another jersey. And when they brought Don Brandt on with 15 minutes to go, they put him on the flank, which is just... And then they took Marcus Smith off. So it didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense with it. And so I think he's trying to figure out what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. I don't know that we'd ever get away with that in Ireland, actually. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I think it's international rugby is incredibly tough, incredibly pressurised, but you want to have some level of consistency in it so that you can see a level of growth. At the moment, I thought the decisions he made, taking the players off at the time he did, destabilised the team a little. And England were in control of that game, but didn't get as much scores on the board, or as many scores on the board as they needed. But in the last 15 minutes, Scotland ran riot, and that coincided with the changes that were made. So, look, I don't know. I think he's getting a lot of criticism. For me, I always think England should be pretty much at the top of the tree. And they are boom or bust under Eddie Jones. They're either winning or the bottom of the table nearly.
And given the quality that they have, even in their bust time, they should be winning these games. They should be near the top consistently. Yeah,
but on that as well, you're saying that it's they have a huge injury profile. Yes, they have, but he also decided not to bring a load of seasoned players, and then he can say, well, this is the team that we have. These are the people. Well, he actually got rid of a lot of guys. Now, whether he should have or shouldn't isn't the point, but it isn't as if they're all injured. And when you looked at that team, having played against teams, now this could be as much my mindset as their mindset, but having played against English teams that have world-class players all over the team, when you're looking at this English team, you're saying, if some good players there, but how many of those guys are world class? Not many, I'd say.
It's a fair point. I suppose we might have thought that up until the World Cup, where the team gelled and had that opportunity to come through. So look, it's definitely a very different way of team building than we have at the moment. I certainly would not be in any rush. I'm surprised that the outcry is so severe at the moment, when it looks fairly obvious that even by leaving out the seasoned players, he's just making room. It's like, you prune the rose bush and what grows back, and some of those old lads might come back into the team. Like, he's already shown some flexibility in bringing forward back, and he's getting criticised for that. I'm like, that's what happens. You've got injuries to people who you want to play, and you have somebody who you've trusted, and he's supposed to be able to, Ford is experienced enough to be able to come on and play well in a game like that. But I don't know, I guess.
Yeah. I'm interested in that, Cher, I'm. It's funny because I would agree with making those, and actually prune a bush and they come back. That's right, but they're actually playing quite a slow style of rugby, and it's funny because the criticisms that we've had here over some of Munster's play or some of Ireland's play has been because we've been very slow and things have slowed things down. England are still playing in that way at 9, but you pick a guy like Marcus Smith at 10 who thrives off quick ball. He plays to a structure, but he plays to a very quick structure. So if you're going to play it slow, I don't know that you necessarily pick Marcus Smith at 10.
Okay, fair enough. We'll come back to England, because I do want to talk a little bit more just about Ireland and the evolution of Tadhg Furlong. It's funny when we talk about Bundy and Bundy's the range of skills that Bundy is exhibiting at the moment being a progression on where he has been in the past. The Connacht fans get up in arms and they tweet us and they screen grab it and they say this is nonsense, he's been doing this for years, he just wasn't allowed to in the past. And I'm like, hang on, that may be true, but actually all the players seem to be getting better. Even Furlong and Sexton seem to be better now because the system is playing to their strengths and it's demanding more of them, or it's giving them more opportunity to showcase their skills. So in that context, can you talk to us a little bit about the evolution of Furlong, who we always raved about as being genuinely world class, but every year he seems to get even better and better and better?
Well, again, it's a structure or a system, but it's also a philosophy. So, if you're not allowed to pass very often, well, you're not going to pass that often. If you are, and if people are expecting it. So that's, I think, been the transition and that period of time where we were a bit critical of Mike Catt and the systems and structures that came in. I think a lot of that is down to the fact that you want a level of certainty. And even if the certainty is that the ball is always going to be live, that there's a great chance it's going to be popped or pushed out the back door or dropped off to somebody, that the hands are up and people are waiting. That as a change is colossal. I think Furlong has always had that, actually. I just think we're now in a system where it can be seen more often. And it also isn't just him. So at times I think he was rushing almost to get there, to be the guy to do it. I don't think he is now. I think it's a comfortable place for him because there's other players doing it. So it's a shared load amongst all the forwards and the backs, actually. And it's very funny. There was a comment from Philippe Saint-André saying that they were talking about Johnny Sexton, and they were saying they were relying less and less on Johnny Sexton. And he said, well, he would go with Ross Byrne, right, which is one of those typical salvos that happen the week of a match. Actually, I agreed with the first part of it. And I think that is the strength of the system, that the reliance is on far more people than just Johnny Sexton. And actually, Johnny looks like he's relishing the role. And look, I was critical of what would happen if we didn't have him. I didn't think we were protecting him, and I didn't think we were. I didn't think he was protecting himself, or if he was too deep, and then he wasn't effective enough for the team. Now I think you get the chance to see him that he's pretty well protected, but that everybody else is sharing the load. So I do think the reliance on him is less and less, like Philippe Saint-André said, but I see the merit of that. I think that's a great place. I think it's good for Johnny. I think it's good for the Irish team.
If you're in that selection meeting, are you trying to shoehorn Ian Henderson onto the bench at the very least? Are you trying to find a role for Robbie Henshaw in the starting team, or what's your gut instinct on that? I know you haven't seen training, so it's an unfair question.
No, it is kind of hard to see it in that. I do see the Henderson idea. Whatever we do, I think Tadhg Byrne has to be on that team, be it at blindside flanker or in the second row. And do you require a heavy scrummaging second row against France? And that may well be the case, that is the right thing to do. Or do you try and run them across the pitch totally so that you try and burn them out after 20 minutes, which is what they used to do with us in the past? I think they are the questions that you have in there. It's hard to drop guys from our back five. I thought James Ryan had one of his better games for Ireland. But yeah, I could see it. But I might start with Tadhg Byrne in the second row and maybe move Henderson onto the bench. And I have to say, I would probably do the same with Henshaw on the bench, and I would have him on the bench. I wouldn't mind if he was playing. It doesn't matter. I think they've played well, but I did think that Ringrose played really well the other day with a lot of space, and he was given space, and I think he showed how difficult it is to play and defend at 13. He had Josh Adams inside out for most of the game. And I thought he played very well. So they looked pretty decent. I also liked the fact of Mac Hansen coming in off the wing. It just pushes everybody out a little bit. And it means guys are involved. I think but again, that's a good addition to have. And they'd started that a little bit with Lowe coming in off the wing more last season. I think his insertions at time were really beneficial to the team. So, look, I think they played well, and we never know what's happening, because last week they said that there was a full squad, and then they said afterwards there was 3 or 4 guys that were injured. So a lot depends on what happens here. I'm not worried for the first time in a long while that we have enough of strength and depth, but not of players that fill the spot, but players that can go and actually add something to it. So I think we're in a strange position where we have plenty of players, you know.
Is there a chance that France can do what England have done to Ireland in those recent years when England were playing well, and actually brutalise us a little bit at the weekend? It's something that New Zealand didn't try and do that. England were underpowered last year against us. We haven't come up against a side as physically as imposing as this French side could be if they chose to play that way against us.
Yeah, I mean, I think France will choose to play very aggressively in the forwards and try and run us ragged as well at the same time. So. Is there a chance? There is a chance. I think this particular French team, the quality that they have, their freedom that they have, which is like France of old, is extraordinary. Now, there's a good pragmatic element to it, and I think Sean Edwards has put in a really good defensive system. I think Ireland's defence has been fantastic. We didn't mention that so far. We didn't give a huge amount of opportunity to Wales. I actually think it's just going to be a cracker of a game. I would say France are favourites because they're playing at home. I would say this was the one game I looked at when I looked at this year that I thought Ireland, there's a good chance they'd lose. I didn't see a Grand Slam this year. Having said that, I didn't think we were perfect at the weekend, and I see merit in us having a higher expectation for our standard for this weekend. So I think it'll be unbelievably close. And some of these games are only 1 or 2 points in it, and I think that could be the case. But like an awful lot of things, I think they rely on some of the referees' interpretation, and they rely on yellow cards and red cards. So it's becoming much harder to make a view because those things seem to happen an awful lot in games at the moment. But I think it's the game of the championship. I think there are 2 of the teams that can play the best rugby, and it's whether they negate each other out as to whether that'll happen. And I think it depends on the weather. I mean, one of the things I'd say for last weekend, elements of the game were sloppy, but it rained and it was very greasy, both in Paris and in Dublin. So I don't think we got to see both their sides at full tilt. But with one match under it, you never know, and maybe the 6-day turnaround for France might be one day that they're just a little bit too tired, and we might benefit from that as well. So I'd like to see the first 20 minutes at 1,000,000 miles an hour and see what happens then.
It does feel that Ireland and the mood around the camp is a lot more positive now than it was around the last 2 meetings against France. And 2 meetings ago, France beat Ireland by 8 points. Last year, they beat Ireland by 2 points, even though from memory you would think that there might have been a bigger gulf between the teams. So does that give you added hope that maybe France don't necessarily compound their dominance over a team on the scoreboard?
They don't yet.
Yeah.
But I would say when you look at France and you look at the French psyche, this and the English games are really the 2 games that they're gunning for in this Six Nations. So they will be at full emotional strength for this one, because this is the one that they consider the challenge. It's one of the criticisms that you have of France, that they can't sustain that over the full season. So with the team that they've had, they should have won the Grand Slam, and they haven't won one since 2010. So I would expect to see them on tip-top form, because this is the big one for them, and that's how they've played it. That's how they've got to it. It's part of their journey to the World Cup for next year. And I have no doubt whatsoever, all their eggs are in the basket to win the World Cup. If they lose matches in this Six Nations, nations, they'll be upset because they want to win, but they can justify it for the greater good of winning the World Cup. That's where they'll be looking for. So in light of that, this is, I think, their biggest match this season, because Ireland are playing really, really well, and they're being compared to Ireland, so they don't like that. So they want to be out on their own. So I just think it's going to be the game of games.
Bring it on, Keith. Great stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, gents.
That's Keith Wood giving us his thoughts ahead of that game at the weekend.